What is it that can change the nature of a man? A question posed by one of the greatest philosophical RPGs of all time, Planescape Torment. But its spiritual successor, a game from a highly underrated studio that deserves so much more, might have just asked an even better one. What is the worth of one life, anyways? If your very essence was at the mercy of a fallen world around you built atop the corpses of dead and forgotten civilizations, if your consciousness was shed from the whispers of a dying god, and if the fate of everything around you relied on answering that one question, what would you do? Well, you're about to find out. So today, let's dive into an RPG that most people haven't even given a thought, that despite its shortcomings, might just be one of the greatest and most riveting dives into philosophy, humanity, and meaning that I've ever played. inXile is maybe one of the most underrated studios making RPGs right now. They're most well known for Wasteland 3, a game that made me fall in love with the CRPG genre in the first place, and has led me to fostering an undying appreciation for classics like Baldur's Gate and Arcanum. But maybe their most misunderstood and least celebrated game, Torment Tides of Numenera, which was released back in 2017, is what really puts this studio above so many others, at least in my book. And it's a shame, because no one is talking about this incredible and underrated game with some of the best world building, story, and questions in all of this medium. Because despite all of this game's shortcomings, of which there are many, all of things we'll dive into here, there's a special feeling and essence that this game gives you that's unlike anything else out there. And I promise if you watch this video until its conclusion, you might just find one of the most thought-provoking stories and worlds out there that you didn't even know about. Pitched originally as a spiritual successor to Planescape Torment, one of the most celebrated RPGs of all time that originally released in 1999, Tides of Numenera was meant to be another big and crazy story that made us all ask the most substantial questions in life, with a world and narrative filled with intrigue. People liked this idea so much that the Kickstarter actually garnered over $4 million in funding, which especially at the time was massive, even beating out the likes of juggernauts like the original Pillars of Eternity Kickstarter from Obsidian. And I think in part because of this game trying to live up to one of the greatest of all time, many people didn't give it the chance it really deserved, or the analysis it begs for. So today, let's do just that. Torment Tides of Numenera starts with you awakening in a strange and dark abyss. A single drop of water hits a massive pan next to you, and in all directions is endless nothingness, with strange hexagonal platforms at your feet. And it's in this mysterious chasm that we start to construct our character, someone known as the Last Castoff, who is just one of hundreds of other consciousnesses that were born from the mad scientist called the Changing God, who can jump between bodies at a whim, and in their place, a new consciousness is born in each husk based on the figments of his psyche. As we traverse this confusing start to the game, we are asked a variety of questions about weird and seemingly random scenarios that dictate who our character is, and was, and more importantly, what our stats will be. You see, in the game there are three main stat pools: might, speed, and intellect. Each signifies a different playstyle you can tackle in game, but naturally I went for the intellect route considering I always like talking my way out of situations in games like this, and well, if you like talking, this game's gonna be for you. This whole intro though is honestly just too esoteric. I like that the game starts in such an intriguing way. I'm a sucker for things like this, but even decisions that should be simple, like choosing some of your stats, comes down to dialogue choices that at the time barely make any sense. Luckily, right at the end of the opening though, we actually get to choose what our character type will be. Between the Glaive, a fearsome warrior known for prowess in combat, a Jack, who is a jack of all trades that excels in stealth, or what I picked, the Nano, who focuses on raw intelligence and understanding of the world and speech. In this game specifically, the Nano is just the obvious choice, and if you're playing yourself, I highly recommend it, as having extra stats and intelligence makes the game so much more enjoyable, especially later on, and your companions can easily pad other things like might and speed checks throughout the entire game. It almost feels like the game was designed first and foremost around being a Nano, so it's the obvious pick for any first playthrough. But regardless of what you choose, you then get to decide what skills and abilities you will start with, and afterwards you suddenly are pulled into a new zone called the Labyrinth, A ghostly figure called the Spectre explains to you that this labyrinth is an aspect of your own mind, and that you must find and activate something called a resonance chamber to attune your own body to its essence. And that turns out to be very true, because just then a massive portal opens within your mind and tentacles reach out from it and start to attack this peculiar purple maze. The Spectre tells you that this monstrosity is something called the Sorrow, which is an ancient and all-powerful being that is hunting you through time and space and will kill you at any cost. And only by getting and activating the resonance chamber can we stop it. And this is your first taste of combat. And boy, oh boy, is the combat bad. Tides of Numenera takes place in a turn-based system where each turn is split between yourself, allies, and enemies alike. And every turn you get to move once and also take one action. Actions can range from using a grenade or health pack in your inventory to casting a massive AoE spell, or just talking to someone in the vicinity in order to try and stop any further conflict. But especially early on, before you've unlocked a wide range of powers and upgrades, this combat system is painfully slow and boring. And sections like this immediately made me not want to play this game at all, because honestly, I just wasn't having very much fun waiting so long for the enemy to take their turn just so I could take the one action I was capable of, swinging my sword and watching a mediocre animation play out only to wait and do it again over and over. Luckily though, this game isn't about the combat at all, and as you'll see, you can actually get through the entire story barely fighting. It's pretty obvious combat in this game was not the primary focus. The writing was. However, weirdly, despite how bad my first impression of this combat was, at the very end of the game, I actually grew to kind of find it genius in a couple of ways, and we'll talk about why specifically later. Because this game has a lot of things that don't make sense or are just plain bad at first, or even through the beginning 15 hours, but blossom into amazing and deep systems or stories much later on, which is probably a big reason so many people didn't enjoy this game. They likely didn't spend all the time it takes to start even getting good, something I had to suffer through for you guys for this video, and it's also the reason I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, despite it now being one of my favorite game worlds ever. Regardless though, after beating this strange so-called sorrow, we'll jump through another portal in our mind and awake now crashed into a strange new area. There are two characters standing next to us, Algern and Calestige, and they're fighting over exactly what is going on. This is where we first learn about our identity as a cast-off, and who the changing god apparently is. We also learn that this massive crystal next to us is actually the resonance chamber that the Spectre talked about, but it's badly damaged and we'll need to find someone to help us repair it. We're told that we apparently came from the sky like a shooting star and crashed right into the resonance chamber, but now have absolutely no idea what's going on, and we need answers. So we ally ourselves with either Calestige or Algern and set off on a path to fix this strange machine. And this is where the real game begins and is your first taste of a lot of the systems that will permeate the entirety of your experience. First of all, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of reading you have to do to enjoy this game. You can talk to characters for what sometimes feels like hours on end, with basically no voice acting at all, just endless pages of text. And in the environments themselves, there's often strange artifacts or things you can investigate which send you down these massive reading sections, some of which put novels to shame. It's actually probably the main reason people gave up on this game so fast, but another one is the god-awful UI. After choosing who the first NPC to join your party will be, you also start getting your first main and side quests, and opening up the UI for the first time to actually look at all of this, I was taken aback with just how bad it looks. I mean seriously, look at this. I struggle to even think of any other games with UIs that look this low budget and frankly weird, and the oddities don't stop at just the look. The design is awful too. Sometimes quests will show instructions out of order that you then have to sift through. Sometimes the scroll wheel will just stop working and you have to drag the vertical bar manually. Things are put in weird places, and descriptions in general are hard to understand and navigate. When you first are playing this game, the UI is a big shock, and at least for me, immediately made my main goal not fixing the weird crystal thing, but instead fighting the main boss, this inventory screen. Luckily, again though, like all things in this game, the UI grows on you over time, and after spending only a short 30 hours with it, it finally feels okay. It's also on this screen though that we learn about some of the most important mechanics in the game: edge and effort. Along with your 3 stat pools of might, speed, and intellect, each stat pool also has something called edge, which is your innate ability with that skill, meaning on skill checks in game, you automatically have a higher % chance to succeed for each point of edge in the corresponding stat pool. Effort, on the other hand, just dictates how much you can push yourself in any given stat pool. giving up some of your points in your pool in order to have a higher chance to succeed on any of the stat checks. To give you an example of how all of this works, you can see in this dialogue check that I have a certain amount of bubbles that I can fill up in order to make the check easier or more likely to pass. Each level of edge I have in the skill means that one more bubble will be filled at the start of the minigame, and each point of effort allows me to push one bubble further in order to make my chances of success slightly higher. For each bubble you extend past your natural ability, you spend 1 point from the corresponding stat pool. And this stat pool for each of your 3 skills can only be refilled by sleeping or getting items, all of which cost a lot of money early game and are very hard to come by, meaning you have a constant battle deciding whether you should spend the extra effort to guarantee success now or save your points for a more important skill check later. It's actually a really cool system, and by the late game it only gets better and way worse, something we'll dive into in the second half of this video. But even more so, what I love so much about this system is the dice roll aspect, the luck inherent in skill checks in this game. Most of the RPGs I grew up loving had stat checks, like Mass Effect and Fallout New Vegas, but in those games, those checks came down to binary moments. Is my charisma modifier high enough to lie? Is my strength stat too low to move this boulder? Succeeding or failing at all of these checks in-game came down to simply whether or not my stats and items met the prerequisite. But recently, after playing Baldur's Gate 3 and falling absolutely in love with that game, one of my biggest takeaways from what I adored about the game was the skill checks relied on a dice roll. Sure, your stats affected whether or not you could succeed, but it wasn't a guaranteed dialogue option that moved the story forward. Rather, it was a dice roll and percentage chance, meaning the game embraced failure and chaos theory, and this allowed for moments where I not only succeeded, but also failed miraculously. Tides of Numenera is the same way, but it's actually even better, and I think maybe it's the coolest stat check system I've ever seen in a game. Because in Tides, because of all of these stat pools, you actually get to dictate the aspect of luck yourself. The more points you put into a stat skill like intelligence, the higher degree of agency you have over the luck aspect. The more points you invest into edge on the particular skill, the less variability you have to deal with. And the more effort you garner as you level up, the more you can swing the chance in your favor. But even with this power, you still have to weigh the options of how many skill points you should spend, how many to save for later, and whether or not it's worth taking your chance on an 80% speech check or saving those vital skill points for later. It adds an extra layer of decision making and challenge to each encounter and every skill check, and it really makes the game engaging, especially early on when many skill checks are very difficult and your resources are very finite. Agency and story comes down to a lot more than just whether you leveled your character correctly for each specific encounter. If there's one mechanic other games need to just steal from Torment Tides of Numenera, it's this, no debate. But it also has its own issues too. Most of the checks in game can be tried over and over again, meaning you can try an intelligence check with an only 5% chance of success, and as long as you don't spend an extra point, you can never run out of resources, and simply have to wait till your luck succeeds. Other luck-based stat check systems like Baldur's Gate have the same issue too, where you can just save scum and reload over and over in order to guarantee an outcome. And I really do hope at some point someone can come up with a genius game design element that can stop or heavily de-incentivize this, because especially in games like Tides of Numenera, it can take away from what otherwise is an amazing system. It forces the player to play in a certain way if they want to experience it in the best way possible, that being not gaming the system at all. And I personally think relying on players to play a certain way never is the answer. Nevertheless, after getting a handle on the UI and the basic systems of speaking, combat, and skill checks, you finally get to the real thing that makes this game so special. The thing that made me fall in love with this studio and what inspired me to do this video in the first place. The world. Because even if you don't play this game, you need to know about it. As you start to walk around the surrounding areas of where you first awoke, you come to find out that this mysterious area that you've crashed into is called Sagas Cliffs, a notable region on a planet called the Ninth World. You see, Tides of Numenera is actually based on a universe from a somewhat unknown tabletop game created decades ago, where we get to explore an Earth billions of years into the future. The Ninth World refers to the previous 9 great civilizations that once inhabited the planet, each of whom were said to forge amazing and unbelievable technologies and societies that conquered the stars or the fabric of reality itself. These now long and forgotten civilizations are now all disappeared, and in our time in the game we instead are part of a human race place far into the future that is more closely structured like a medieval society than anything interplanetary. But because of the Ninth World's storied past and legacy, the areas we run around in are filled to the brim with what is called Numenera, which are relics or ancient devices from those long-lost civilizations of the past, often found beneath the shifting sands all over the world. So while society itself is still somewhat primitive in its format, there's access to many fascinating and otherworldly technologies that create a setting unlike anything I've ever seen. Honestly, to me, the best part about this game is without a doubt uncovering all of this Numenera and the secrets of these past ancient civilizations and what happened to this world. How did humanity get to where it is now? What are all these powerful beings and monsters we find? And what did these ancient civilizations beyond our comprehension discover? I'm a sucker for these Lovecraftian type narratives and sci-fi specifically. It's the reason I fell in love with things like Mass Effect in the first place, and Tides of Numenera is filled with it. I can't stress enough how interesting the lore and backstory is here, even though in order to actually experience it, you have to read through endless lines of text with very few set pieces or cool moments like you would in a bigger budget game. It's so good in fact that even just walking around and discovering new things and the ideas that come along with them was so captivating that in a way the main drive for this game, for me at least, wasn't even the story. It was the enthralling world and uncovering all that it had to offer. The other big aspect of this world is something called the Tides, which are an invisible and powerful force used by the cast-offs like yourself, and are essentially an ephemeral guiding light to your principles and values. In practice, this essentially is just your alignment system you would see in other games, but instead of just good and evil or lawful and chaotic, this system has a bunch of different colors that correspond to different moral and ethical drives and dreams. For example, the gold tide in-game corresponds to helping others in need and doing the right thing, while the blue tide relates to the thirst for knowledge and understanding. So in conversations throughout your journey, the decisions you make can align you more or less in each of these tides, and this can have an effect on all of the quests and main story or endings as well. Or at least, that's how the idea was pitched, but in game, it doesn't actually have that much of a difference regardless of what you choose. The real issue though is at first, just like everything else in the game, you have no idea what is going on here. In dialogue, sometimes a prompt pops up telling you you gained favor in a certain tide, but that means nothing until you reach the final act of the game where you finally are starting to understand that each tide means something different anyway. I think this system overall could have been handled a lot better in terms of showing the player directly what each meant and the impact it would have on you, but regardless, it's still a cool idea in principle, especially for a game like this. And the first place you get to see this in action is as you walk into Sagas Cliffs right at the start of the game. Now on your mission to find a way to repair that resonance chamber from before, you walk into a strange and otherworldly band of tribes and peoples in Sagas Cliffs. It's here too you get your first look at the cults and side quests of the game, most of which are really good. The first side quest I did before continuing the main story was called Stay of Execution, where I stumbled upon a crowd gathered around a man who was being held in the grasp of an unusual thorn creature, who was slowly killing the man by shoving branches down his throat in a horrific scene, giving him only 3 days left to live. You learn that the man is actually innocent of the crimes, and that someone else in the crowd named Tibir, someone who can actually also join your party as a team member, feels somewhat guilty as he tried to get the man to move illegal material without him knowing, and in order to make things right, you have to figure out a way to save him. There's a lot of ways to accomplish this, whether that's forging a stay of execution which will halt the death sentence, rallying the crowd to your side, or even convincing the guards to just let you onto the platform somehow and figuring it out from there. And within each of these variations, there's a lot of ways to figure it out even further. For example, if you try to forge a stay of execution, you could sneak and steal one, you could just try and talk someone into giving it to you, you could pay for one, or you could randomly stumble upon it. You could also rally the crowd to force the police force back, but you could likewise just rat Tibir out and solve the conundrum that way. Open-ended side quests like this are great and give the player a lot of options to figure out solutions in their own way. And while not every quest in the game is as in-depth, they're almost all at least fascinating in their own right. Like another side quest where I met a levy, who are the police force in Sagas Cliffs, and learn that they are created by taking 1 year of life away from any citizen in the cliffs and converting it into a husk that obeys orders and laws. You see, in order to get citizenship in Sagas Cliffs, each person must sacrifice 1 year of their life to some ancient technology they barely understand, essentially giving up a part of themselves to protect the whole. And when talking to this specific levy, we learn that it was given a particularly bad year from a man's life, where he would have killed many people and committed many heinous acts. So this levy feels immense guilt over things it's never done, and you must talk to the original man who was used to create this levy and ask him to instead give the levy a new year and accept the guilt of what he would have done instead. That way the levy doesn't have to suffer from the actions that neither of them ever really committed. It's ideas like this that are so fascinating that make you ask a lot of questions, like should someone be held accountable for the actions of another person if it's for the greater good? If we had the technology, should we hold people responsible for crimes that they never actually committed but would have? If you took the worst year away from someone's life, would they suddenly become a different person? Or would nothing change at all? Another great example of this is a small discussion I had with one vendor in game revolving around botched implants he had that made it impossible for him to lie. And the talk revolved around how he thought it would ruin his business, but actually it ended up helping him tremendously. Telling people immediately that he was ripping them off to make a little extra money to support his family actually had the opposite effect of making people trust him more, because at least they knew what they were getting themselves into, and thus his business boomed. All of these side quests really make you think about your own life and the principles you hold so close. And for me, that's exactly what I wanted from this game, and it delivers. And this is seen in no better place than the cults of the game. Because as you are running around Sagas Cliffs doing side quests and the main story, you also get your first taste of many of these fascinating tribes, of which you will see many as you travel further into the world. Like one called the Dendra O'Hur, who are a satanic-looking and menacing assortment of individuals found in the underbelly of the city, in its deepest tunnels, who worship an all-knowing queen called Sar Lavun, Lady of Maggots. The Dendra O'Hur have a strict doctrine based around the principles of knowledge and understanding, and their main goal is to preserve the knowledge of all that came before them in order to maintain the wisdom of the world lest it all be lost again. However, where this takes a horrific twist is how the Dendra O'Hur accomplish this. You see, it's only by consuming the minds of other peers that the Dendra can understand them, and thus they have all turned to cannibalism, many times eating dead bodies off the street in order to transfer the knowledge from their brains and their past lives into their own. This means you can have talks with many members about the logic and understanding of hundreds of souls melded into one. And this can lead to very abstract and engaging conversations. And later in the game, you even meet their sister cult, which is far, far more horrifying. Something we'll get into shortly. And it's once again things like this that make Tides of Numenera such a special game. It felt like everywhere I went and everyone I talked to, my imagination was bursting into flame. I was constantly thinking about philosophy, ethics, society, and just cool or harrowing sci-fi concepts, the types of things that keep you up at night just thinking. But regardless of how cool all the side quests and cults or even little tidbits of lore in the world itself were, this introduction to the game is still very, very slow. And at many times it can feel like a struggle to continue reading more and more and carrying on regardless of all of these endless text dumps. Oftentimes I had to take breaks and pick up the game later the next day just so I didn't burn out. One potential problem people might run into as well that makes this issue even worse is just how esoteric and strange a lot of the writing is in the beginning. When I originally was playing Tides, it almost felt like every other person I talked to was having a schizophrenic episode where they would just ramble on and on about things I knew nothing about and speak in riddles and ciphers, constantly using strange phrases or referencing things that made no sense. It's at points like this I wish that the dialogue system had something similar to Tyranny, where you could highlight over words and it would tell you a brief description of what it was. That way it was easier to keep sense of everything going on. So many of my first conversations in the game, I just sat reading and wondering, what the hell is going on here? Or other moments where the writing was so obscure and abstract that it honestly felt like the narrative team had just finished an especially rough DMT trip as they crafted away. Like, take this exchange I had with an NPC called the Genocide, who apparently was the last known survivor of a lost civilization called the Tabat, which humanity fought many years ago to take over Sagas Cliffs. After talking with him for some time, you can inquire about how he and his people served a great deity known as the Underspine, who was an enslaved machine intelligence that guided and prophesized the future. And we can dig deep into the philosophies of his people and the creature. And at one point I asked, what was the Underspine? And his response was, you would not understand. It was a machine, it was stone, it was a cavern, it was a city. It was the direct voice of our ancestors. It spoke in our heads and in our ears and in our hearts. We heard its voice in our creches, in our daily instructions. Our God was true and strong and singular, not the fickle and constant things of the modern day. When I first read this, I literally started laughing out loud because of how absurd and pretentious the writing felt. Like the game was trying to paint this picture of something that was way more important when it really wasn't. Ironically though, this once again plays into the main issue with this game. It doesn't actually click until right at the end. Because now making this video and reading this discussion back with the genocide, I actually find it really enthralling and interesting. But only because I know later in the game this story and its themes and lore gets fleshed out much more to the point where I understand what's going on and I appreciate this conversation so much more. In fact, I even find this conversation with the genocide actually engaging now. And in a way, it's really great writing that makes your imagination go wild. But once again, at the start of the game, things like this and just the endless amounts of insane conversations that you have to grapple with that make no sense become tiring fast. And like I said, it took me over 15 hours of playing this game before I went from feeling like I was in a ridiculous fever dream to being in one of the coolest sci-fi worlds ever dreamed of. Luckily though, as I've said, as the game goes on, it only gets better. But in order to get there, we have to continue on our main quest to fix that resonance chamber. There are many different ways to figure out how to go about this, but on my first playthrough, I met with the cult of the Changing God, a band of fanatic worshippers who pray to the Changing God as a sort of deity, and see the cast-offs as his disciples, meaning you are a huge significance to them since you are the last cast-off, the most recent body that the Changing God has shed. After helping them with a strange device near their camp, they inform you of a woman named Matkina, who is another cast-off who could likely help you with the resonance chamber, and she is located somewhere in the underbelly. So you travel deep into the underbelly's neon city and find a mapper who knows of her location, but will only give it to you if you can find the Changing God's secret sanctuary deep under the city's walls. There's actually a lot of ways to go about locating this zone, including discovering Matkina without the mapper entirely, but on my first playthrough, I was able to reanimate the dead body of a Stitcha, a native beast to the underbelly that digs tunnels and speaks in a strange dialect, and with full control of this monster, convinced it to dig me a tunnel to the Changing God's lair. Sadly though, it's here you come across potentially your first big combat encounter of the entire main story, and dear God is it bad. Between you and the door to the Changing God's sanctuary is a massive Stitcha nest full of bloodthirsty monstrosities, and if you haven't allied yourself already with them due to past actions and side quests, then your only way to get to the Changing God's sanctuary is by might or sneaking. And the issue is, both of these options absolutely suck. Honestly, this was the encounter in the game that showed me just how bad the combat could really get, and it's hard to emphasize just how frustrating the game's mechanics all come together here into what can only be described as a shit show. Located in this nest is actually one of your other side quests to steal Stitcha eggs as well, and right next to the door you are trying to get to is a massive pack of Stitcha that wanders around aimlessly in multiple directions. This means every turn you're trying to put characters into sneak, and then the next turn you're walking them over to eggs or sneaking closer and closer to the door. And on each of the Stitcha's turns, they're making some strange sound with a small radius that if they catch you in, they spot you and immediately become hostile. On the face of it, the idea of the encounter isn't bad, that being sneaking around an enemy encampment and stealing, all while trying to get out alive. We've seen that before and it can work. But the issue is, because of how combat works in Tides, it's painfully slow and clunky. It takes forever for the Stitcha in the zone to take their turn, meaning you have to hopelessly watch as they slowly walk around and cast their strange echolocation spell, only for it not to be near you at all and spot you anyways, or for you to be right next to them and they aren't even aware of your presence. If you actually try to attack or steal the eggs, since you are still at a low level, the percentage chance to steal or land a hit is often so low that your characters look like a blind ballerina trying to pull off the dance of the century. On top of this, since you still don't have many skills or items unlocked for each of your characters, your options are super limited. And considering that in combat, to increase your chances to hit or land a spell, you have to use those same stat pools you use in dialogue, it makes actually engaging with these Stitcha the worst possible scenario, since you might wind up not being able to succeed on important dialogue checks later. Instead, it makes most sense to literally just run right past them and hope they don't kill you. It's yet another situation where the game systems are cool in theory, but in practice, early on, they just cause so many issues. Combat and narrative taking from the same stat pool is a great idea and makes every decision you make in and outside of combat that much more impactful. But it only actually works this way much later into the game when you have more abilities and ways to make decisions besides, well, just running. Frankly, this whole situation just makes the combat in the game feel so unpolished at these early levels, and I quite literally contemplated giving up on the game right here because despite how cool the world and story was up to this point, I just couldn't be bothered when I was having so little fun playing the actual game. You know, what video games are all about. It opens up a weird debate about gameplay versus narrative in games, and while I think it's clear for most people gameplay is king, for me, I tend to be able to forgive bad moment-to-moment action when the narrative is very compelling. And in this case, that's all that got me through this section. But I think for the large majority of the player base, including those of you watching right now, moments like this are why you probably will have a lot more fun listening to me talk about this game than you will actually playing it yourself. Basically what I'm saying is, I sacrificed my sanity in these early hours just for you guys. A true American hero. Like and subscribe. But nonetheless, after getting caught over and over by the Stitcha and dying, I finally made it past this hell encounter and through the door to the Changing God's Sanctuary. It's here you discover more about the man's mysterious past and some experiments he was doing on consciousness, ancient technologies, and the elusive online net. And after rummaging through his stuff for long enough, looking at a mirror in the center of the room too closely sends you back to the strange machine outside the Changing God cultist camp, who funnily enough don't even remark about how you just randomly teleported out of thin air right in front of them. These guys must have seen some shit. Next you head over to the mapper and give him the location of the Changing God's Sanctuary that you found. And lo and behold, he holds up his end of the bargain as well, and gives you the location of Matkina, who you can then get to using that same Stitcha you controlled from earlier. When you find Matkina, you talk to her about her time as a cast-off, and how she came to be known as the White Death, an apparently well-known serial killer in the depths of Sagas Cliffs. But the most interesting part of this encounter is when Matkina explains how she is currently trying to unlock what is called a mirror caster. Mirror casters and tides are powerful artifacts that allow cast-offs to uncover and retain stolen memories of their past, and even more interestingly, can alter the fabric of reality itself. Matkina is trying to unlock the secrets of this one in order to figure out some of the things she has done but long forgotten. She asks that you enter the mirror in her stead, and when you do, you are sent back to a part of her past where she was an assassin under the control of a leader named Paj Raken. You see the world through the mind of her scout that she spotted for, and can relive the moments of Matkina and this other body you inhabit as they take on a mission to find a mysterious artifact called a Jock. Throughout this entire section, a new UI pops up with a standard CRPG staple of text on a screen with some cool art in the background describing what's going on. But the best parts of these Mirrorcaster sections, of which there will be many more in this game as the story progresses, is that throughout these visions into the past, you get to use your stat pools and upgrades in order to affect and change the story. You see, in this Mirrorcaster specifically, we learn that Matkina was tricked into activating this Jock in order to wipe out some local Sand Knights, which after being weakened are slaughtered by a local tribe. And it's after this that you as the scout and assassin talk to Paj Raken about wiping Matkina's mind in order that she does not remember the betrayal you committed upon her. But depending on what stat checks you pass and how you decide to do things, you can actually quite literally rewrite the past of what happened. You can use your speed checks to disarm traps before they happen in the Jock, and you can use your intelligence stats to convince Paj that you have already wiped Matkina's mind when you really haven't, before Paj kicks Matkina off a cliff. And depending on all of the choices you make here, they directly affect the world you come back into. After all, remember, the Mirrorcaster is more than just a vision of the past. It quite literally is taking over the mind of a person in the past, and thus has direct effect on the future and present. So when you finally complete this and come back to reality, the fabric of time and space itself has changed based on the decisions you made in the Mirrorcaster, meaning Matkina can have a new history and knowledge of the past based directly on your actions. It's such an awesome sci-fi concept, and the fact that the main story of this game relies so heavily around it makes it all that much better. I can't stress enough how much more engaged with the story I started becoming at this point, and even the idea of uncovering the past minds and future actions of cast-offs who don't even remember who they were as the Changing God in now long gone lives and the actions they have done. It's just inherently an awesome story to start uncovering more of. Once again though, it's plagued by the all too common problem of this game of being very obscure and hard to understand at first. Remember, if you're hearing me talk about this game and what happens, it's a lot different than trying to piece it together for yourself at first, when you literally have no clue what is going on and you're immediately thrown into the minds of people in the past with no context whatsoever. But nonetheless, after confronting this new Matkina about what we have seen and done, she tells us we need to get to a special location called the Valley of Dead Heroes, where we can find a place called Miel Avest, which will give us more of the the answers that we need. And so we set out to command an airship to take us to the valley, and on the way pick up a couple of new recruits to our team, including Matkina herself and an especially memorable character named Eratis. And this is also as good a time as ever to briefly touch on the companions in the game, and I have some sort of controversial things to say here. I don't really care all that much about companions in games. You know, I loved Mass Effect characters as a kid growing up, but honestly playing it again as an adult now, I realized what I really always loved about the world was its story and themes, not the endless characters and their narratives in its second installment. It just feels like often characters in games are written not as their own people, but as a plot device to move your own story along as the main character. And it's similar here in Tides too. There's a good amount of different characters to enlist to your party here, all with their own powers and personalities, most notably Eratis, who has a demon inside his head talking to him that you can help him get rid of, who gives him unrelenting confidence and optimism in the face of all danger, leading to many funny moments where Eratis charges headfirst into absurd situations, bumbling like an idiot but providing some much needed comedic relief. But besides some good moments like this, I didn't really get attached to any of the characters in this game. You can tell in Exile tried to make some of them interesting in their own ways, but for me, it just didn't work for any of them, if I'm being honest. I tended to ignore them and their quests and just focus on what I really cared about: the world and the main story. Also, side note, for anyone who is curious, the one game I have played where I actually got really attached to side characters and their story was Cyberpunk 2077, which is a big reason I praise that game so much. It's literally the only one that's ever been able to do it in every game I've played. Judy, Panam, and Johnny in that game are the best representation of actual pain and growth in human beings I've ever seen in this medium, and for me, nothing else even comes close. For most other games, it's all about the story. But back in Tides, after getting control of an airship, you fly over to an entirely new zone, that being the Valley of Dead Heroes, which is an endless prison for millions of dead and lost souls, with a massive structure home to countless vaults honoring the dead and their belongings and history. It's here we come into contact with two new cults: the Children of the Endless Gate and the Memoralis. The Memoralis are the helpless good guys of the zone, while the Children of the Endless Gate are actually a splinter sect of the Dendro Her that believe they must rid souls of their bodies in order for them to find salvation. Or translation, they kill and eat people because they're crazy. Both of these factions have super interesting ideals and philosophies you can dive into if you so wish, but it's not necessary to continue forward on the main path. The two peoples explain how they have been caught up in something called the Endless War, which apparently is a war between the cast-offs who follow the first cast-off ever, who rebelled and turned against the changing god, and the cast-offs who still serve their master. This war has been going on for centuries with no end in sight, and it serves as some great lore background before we travel to the next part of the story. Our main mission with coming to the Valley of Dead Heroes was to uncover the vault of the first cast-off ever, where we can find a portal to Miela Vest. Doing this involves either helping the Memorialists or Children of the Endless Gate, but regardless of the decisions you make here or all of the interesting side quests you can get up to, you eventually get into this ancient vault and through the portal. Miela Vest is a beautiful and luxurious place, home to cast-offs looking to run away from the elusive sorrow we met at the beginning of the game, the shadow monster chasing us all in our dreams. It seems to be that the sorrow is chasing down all cast-offs and the changing god alike, and Miela Vest serves as a sanctuary to hide from the sorrow and the endless war alike. In fact, in this place you can meet different generals and peoples on each side of the endless war, and also others like the original cast-off founder of the Dendro Her. It's clear being in this place just how big of an effect the cast-offs have had on the Ninth World, which makes sense considering their natural abilities and power over the mysterious force of the Tides. It seems like many of the big events and things that have happened in the world are a direct result of the cast-offs, which means just one man, the changing god, seems to have birthed an entire race of demigods that cause chaos. In Miela Vest, we also meet with the zone's leader, Eratis, who has us speak to everyone in this sanctuary in order to get a better understanding of what's going on, after which she gives us a Mirrorcaster for Mazov, a cast-off said to have the knowledge needed to repair the resonance chamber we set out to fix in the first place. In this Mirrorcaster, we get to see the mind of another man who was close to Mazov, who is midway through a fantastical mission for the changing god, to uncover powerful artifacts for research. You travel along a strange and desolate land filled to the brim with skeletons of massive monsters, and either fight your way through the hordes or slowly search the area, either until you are attacked and saved or find a way out. And it's then that you travel through a portal and wind up in a base of sorts with the Changing God and Mazov. And if you talk to Mazov, you learn that the Changing God's real plan is to use the resonance chamber to combine all cast-offs into himself, a final gambit to stop the sorrow. And in order to do so, he must activate the resonance chamber with a special body he has formed, the body of the last cast-off. And Mazov tells you that he is going to a place called the Bloom in order to try and figure everything out. Suddenly though, you are pulled from the Mirrorcaster and back into the labyrinth of your mind, where you must find and speak to the Spectre from the beginning of the game, who reveals that he is actually the Changing God himself, trapped in your own mind due to an accident, and he wants his body back. Here you can give in or resist, and if you resist, he curses you and says it's not over. After which you once again wake up in your body in Miela Vest, but this time with the entire holy place up in enormous flames. The sorrow is broken through the gates, and there is now an all-out battle happening where you must quickly decide who to save and who to leave behind as more and more of the facility breaks and crumbles away. This combat section specifically was actually a lot more fun because there were so many decisions you could make, whether it was breaking open certain passageways using might skill checks, or turning on shield barriers everywhere to help people run, or even talking to some of the scared guards and using intellect checks to convince them to go help others escape. All while a massive and unkillable monster, the Sorrow, chases you down. Eridus ends up sacrificing herself to distract the Sorrow to buy you more time, and this allows you to narrowly escape by activating a strange artifact that teleports you and everyone else you have helped escape to the best part of the entire game, the third act, the Bloom. I mentioned earlier how the main drive for me playing this game was the story, and more importantly, the world and sci-fi themes it presents, and more than any part of the game, it's this final act. An act that took me many hours to even get to, that really just nails how awesome this universe is, and also where all the mechanics finally come to bear. The Bloom is a massive and dictatorial monstrosity that inhabits large portions of the Ninth World. It's a living being with gaping maws and tentacles that swallow things whole and deposit them into its deepest bowels. Each of these maws can also transpose living creatures between different times and dimensions, and within the Bloom itself lies a never-ending cavern of dark, damp, and terrifying locations that resemble the inside of a human stomach that many people call home. The Bloom itself is a primeval monster that has what seems to be telekinetic powers, on top of many other strange abilities, and those that live on its insides often are driven mad by the aura that is being given off. Inside the Bloom also lies a Memovira, a person who is chosen as the leader of this desolate place, and can command great armies and power to get their way. This is by far the best start to any act in the game, and it resembles what I personally love most in good sci-fi settings, those all-powerful and knowledgeable Cthulhian-like beings that make you simply sit back and bask in awe. Being here in the Bloom reminded me of some of my favorite moments from other sci-fi games, like talking with Sovereign, the Rachni, or the Thorian in Mass Effect. But because of the emphasis on philosophy and thought-provoking questions here in Tides, it becomes even better. When you first get to the Bloom, you meet a man named Dracodon, an information broker who has met the Changing God in some of his previous bodies already, and knows of Miela Vest, saying that he can help you if we help him. He needs an artifact stolen from him called a magmatic amulet, and if we deliver this to him, he will give us an audience with the Memovira who can help us out. So you venture out and search all across the Bloom in order to find this amulet, and during your time you stumble across so many interesting moments, like finding a slave trader who is auctioning off prisoners who have been swallowed by the Bloom in its massive maws. But just when you expect the prisoners to be angry and sad, instead they are relieved. The maws of the Bloom can sense emotion and fear, and feed off these raw emotions in order to feed itself, meaning often prisoners in areas across the Ninth World like Sagas Cliffs would run to the Bloom in search of salvation, opting to take their chances at losing an arm, leg, or even their own sanity instead of being locked away forever and tortured. You can find entire civilizations of people that have known nothing but the Bloom for their entire lives, crash ships from hyper-intelligent civilizations in entire other galaxies and dimensions that have been swallowed whole by maws and are now trapped in the fleshy guts of this behemoth. And as you continue to search around, you eventually find the entrance to 3 new zones to explore, explore, one of which has a maw that will take you to where you need to go to find that magmatic amulet. But on my first playthrough, I actually guessed wrong on where my first area to go would be, and instead I went somewhere that would take me to a place even more special, and the coolest side zone I experienced in the whole game. This area was called the Trading Post, and is home to many mutants and dejected citizens of the Bloom cities. And it's when I originally walked into this zone that I got the first combat encounter that actually made me realize just how good this game's mechanics can be. You walk into the middle of a confrontation between some of the Trading Post peoples and the guards of the Memorvira. The guards are looking for pay, but the citizens are refusing to pay up, seeing as the Memorvira has lost a lot of power as of late, and they're beginning to lose trust in her. Suddenly you are thrown into combat, but before you have to cast any spells, you actually can use your turns to try and talk to each of the sides, aiming to convince them to not fight at all. This encounter can play out in a variety of ways, and it allows you to use all of your stat pools and interesting conversation checks, or even checks in the environment that allow you to try and skip the combat portion of this section entirely. And lo and behold, if you're skilled enough, you can convince both sides to just let it go and move on. Which for me was great because I just don't like the tedious combat in this game very much at all. And being able to talk your way out of situations like this makes it so much better. But something about this engagement specifically was the one that showed me all the missed opportunities the team at inXile had to create something really special here. I think encounter design like this can be so engaging, where you have some characters talking to others to change the outcome of battle, while others are hurling fireballs at incoming enemies, while others even are using their skills in athletics to climb and scale the battlefield to get an advantage. While most of the engagements in this game don't live up to this potential, there are moments like this one that make you realize just how amazing this sort of design with stat pools and multiple ways to tackle each encounter could have been. Imagine if you could cast a cage spell using your speed stats on an enemy and then force it to talk to you mid-battle using your intelligence speech checks, all while your companions held off waves of enemies and caused the environment to close off and buy you more time. The game has all the systems in place already to pull off technically amazing feats like this, and that would result in really dynamic and memorable moments. But the actual encounter design never reaches those heights or allows you to experiment this deeply. At least in the final act though, it gives you a taste of what could have been. But regardless, it's this now free trading post area that I was able to find a dormant maw that would not open. Its tendrils craved for a deep emotion my character didn't feel: guilt. And in order to force it open, I actually had to find a girl who was being held captive and tortured by another man I scared off. And this girl was feeling immense guilt for the things she had done under the rule of this sadistic man, meaning I was able to transfer her own guilt into my mind and feed it to the maw. Or I could have just fed her to the maw instead, but I'm not that much of an asshole. And after giving the maw access to my mind to unlock it, I teleported to my favorite location in the entire game: Lost Anchorage. It's a massive space station hovering over the Ninth World, where its inhabitants have lived on it for over 10,000 years with no outside contact to their original peoples. You can converse with everyone on board and learn about its history, how a small band of people from a ship that got stuck here had to repopulate, and about the mutinies and uprisings that have happened over now thousands of years, how society had changed and the implications of living in a society cut off from the rest of the universe for so long, all while patiently praying that one day their peoples would return and save them. It's an area you don't even have to come to in game. Some people that play Tides of Numenera might not even ever see this location, and when you first get here, you don't actually have any idea of what's going on, and it's only by talking with everyone on board that you get a much better idea of the horrors of this place as you piece it all together. And while in game, this apparently massive and great space station really just comes down to one room with a small side door, it's the writing and ideas that make it so special. I can't stress enough how amazing this game and its locations could have been if they had a $100 million budget and 6 years of dev time. But regardless, the picture it paints in your mind is almost just as powerful. To me, this is what peak sci-fi is. Traveling from an underground telekinetic monster that feeds off the weak emotions and traverses through different dimensions into a lost space station that makes you question the vastness of space and its empty and lonely nature, all while contemplating what it would be like to live in either of these equally horrid places. And it's points like this in the game that I almost forget about all of the bad things. The horrible UI, the clunky combat, the missed opportunities, and all those quirks that showed the game was rushed and underfunded in too many ways. None of that matters though when a game can capture your imagination in such a profound way. I've played games where I enjoyed the combat better or thought the moment-to-moment gameplay made more sense or was easier to get into, but it's very seldom I've played a game that had me thinking about it this much afterwards. There are a ton more things you can do in Lost Anchorage and the trading post, including talking to a forgotten ancient AI with extensive knowledge of the past, but for the main story, you need to continue on and search through other parts of the bloom to find that amulet. And lo and behold, the place to find it is the Georgian Slum, and it's here you can find the actual maw that will lead you to the amulet. After getting through this maw, you arrive at a new location called the Ascension, a frozen tundra filled to the brim with giant shards of ice, some which contain living creatures that even speak to you, along with a host of tribesmen that worship the changing god himself. It's in this location that you can also find a lair of the changing god in one of the tunnel networks, and in this lair you discover a massive research station, where the changing god was delving into the power of the crystals on this planet in an effort to work on the resonance chamber. You can read through the Changing God's logs here about experiments and monsters he created, and about how Dracodon came at one point to get the amulet he had stolen, and the Changing God had to abandon his body at the time and the research in the caves. The last log is even that of the new castoff not knowing what is going on just as it's starting to form consciousness while being attacked. What a way to be born. And after searching around a little more, you figure out how to unlock the secret door that gives you access to the amulet hidden away. And so you grab it and head back to the bloom to give your spoils to Dracodon. But on your way out, the band of Changing God cultists attacks you at the command of the specter in your head that claims to be the Changing God, and you have to wipe them out or talk your way out of it. Now, traveling back through the Maw's interdimensional portal, you go back to Dracodon and give him the amulet, or a drive from the Lost Anchorage if you were smart enough and obtained one while you were there on the ship. And he leads you to the Memovira, where she will tell you that she can bring you to the first castoff, who will know how to fix the resonance chamber, but first you must save one of her best Numenera scholars, who has found himself trapped inside the bloom's heart, the deepest and most dangerous part of the entire monster. So you venture out in search of how to get to this heart, and eventually you discover that there's actually a secret maw being hidden in the shrine of Great Sheila, a shrine to the previous Memovira. There are a ton of ways to try and get this bad boy open, including sacrificing your own companions, but I was able to convince a local predator warrior to sacrifice itself in the name of honor, and the passage was open. The maw drops you into the gullet of the bloom, the digestive system filled with pus, screams, and horrors. And you have to fight, talk, and search your way through multiple encounters to eventually make your way to the nethermost cavity, through a gaping hole in the stomach. Here you fight your way through hordes of enemies while running to escape through the back door, and after painfully keeping all of my companions alive through this section, you finally arrive at what you came for, the heart of the bloom. In the heart's interior, you find a mass of tendrils and must decide whether or not to bring any companions up to the heart with you. I decided to go in alone because I almost felt bad for how little I cared about any of the characters, and they deserved a better leader. And also, my intelligence stat was just so high at this point, I couldn't imagine any situation in which I needed any help. Eratus complained wanting to be a hero like me, but I told him to shut his demon ass up and to be a good boy. As you approach the heart, you can see trapped in its firm grasp the man that the Memovira had asked us to bring back. And in order to do so, you must talk to the maw and pass an endless barrage of stat checks, none of which were a problem for my character, who had dumped absolutely all upgrades and stats into intelligence. And it's also in this section that we get a deeper look into the bloom and its mind. You can tap into the memories of all of the creatures and ancient civilizations that the maws have devoured over now millions of years, and hear countless stories and recountings of their lives. Then the bloom starts to show you memories of the changing god himself, talking to a woman named Maralel, the first castoff, and then suddenly the bloom releases the man in its grasp, revealing that the captured Numenera scientist in the heart is actually none other than Massoff, who you saw in the Mircaster and Miela Vest. You talk to Massoff and he reveals that the Memovira is in fact the first castoff, and that she has a plan to use the resonance chamber just like the changing god to stop the sorrow, but is trying to save the castoffs in the process, but Massoff knows it likely will kill them all regardless. He leaves and tells you to meet him where the first castoff, Maralel, or the Memovira, is. But before you go, you can pick up a Mircaster off the ground that Massoff left behind and peer into it, resulting in one of the most well-written and enthralling expositions in the whole game. In the mirror, you see through the eyes of Thom, a castoff in the First Army in the Endless War years ago. You learn that the reason the first castoff was able to even fight her master in the first place was because of a device she had control over called the Reconciler, from an ancient lost civilization. The Reconciler had the power to look at multiple versions of the future or any reality for an event and lock it into place at once, using the principles of quantum mechanics to observe something and thus make it the truth. But this all-powerful device could be counteracted by one the changing god had, called Heaven's Rejoinder, which could undo any of the realities set forth by the Reconciler and instead make reality its own. As this story in the mirror goes on, you are on a mission to either fight or infiltrate and obtain this Heaven's Rejoinder for the first side, and you go on to travel through massive time and reality storms, which distort the reality of space-time itself, or converge onto fractured ripples of future possibilities that drift in superposition against all of existence. And it's here it also becomes clear that the Endless War is a battle of the first castoff and the changing god to control powers and forces of the future, and to gain control of this resonance chamber, all in a final gambit to stop this all-powerful sorrow from taking over. I have to say, putting in all this awesome sci-fi stuff right at the end of the story is cool, but it's kind of cheap at the same time. It's cheap in the sense that all these awesome ideas and cool themes never get to really be explored more, and it's quite obvious that a lot of these ideas were just things that had to be botched together right at the end, since the game probably didn't have the budget or time to focus on them more. But on the same token, reading through and experiencing all of this lore and history in this entire section, and finally piecing together so many of the things that have been mysterious for the majority of the playthrough, all while learning more about those ancient civilizations' technology whose Numenera we've been seeing through our entire gameplay, it's a really satisfying moment, I won't lie. And the absolutely immaculate writing here just pulls you in so much. And as I was playing, I quite literally in my head fully painted the pictures of what was being described to me, and the small portions of art that are present on screen just enhance that experience. If you had any doubts this is one of the coolest sci-fi worlds out there, this entire third act and all of these stories and moments, many of which I had to cut out for this review, otherwise it would have lasted hours, should assure you that this game's world is beyond special. However, now it is with this newfound knowledge that we must go and confront the first castoff, and tell her that we know of her plans. When we arrive, the first castoff tells us her plan is to sever the connection between castoffs and the tide, and that this will stop the sorrow from pursuing them endlessly, and that you were created with a body with extreme control of the tides that can activate the resonance chamber and end all of this. You also learn that the first castoff has already found the resonance chamber and has brought it here in front of you, asking her to join you. You can decide to do a handful of things here, including just fighting her outright, but instead I chose to trick the first castoff and tell her that I was on her side. And as I walked up to the crystal, the sorrow suddenly appeared and started to attack everyone. As the chaos was happening, the first castoff activated the crystal, which would take some time to fire up, and jumped into battle. While they were distracted, I changed the firing sequence on the crystal to fire at myself, and after hiding from the onslaught for a couple of turns while I let the first castoff do all the work, the resonance chamber fires and we awake once again in the labyrinth. A ghostly woman stands before you and tells you that everyone, including all of the castoffs, have now been trapped in your mind, in the labyrinth that you have been coming back to over and over throughout the game, and that you must go through a portal to a place called Resonance, where you can stop the changing god and the sorrow once and for all. Before you do though, you have to go through multiple other portals to strange lands called Fathoms that your companions and other characters have been trapped in. Depending on your choices throughout the game, these Fathoms and what they are like can be affected. It's a perfect idea for how to tie choice and consequence to an ending of a game, but once again in Tides, the idea is better than the actual execution, and different CRPGs like Tyranny do choice and consequence way better. It's actually what I think is the second most important thing for an RPG, but in my case, the first most important thing is a world, and here, Tides probably has Tyranny beat, but only by a little bit. For example, in one of the Fathoms you travel to, it's an underwater city like Atlantis, where you can find Callistes trapped in her own nightmares, and after saving her, you can have her join your party again, or even have her ascend into the data realm, to get the knowledge she has always desired. It's super cool, but basically the same no matter what you did in game, with only slight variation. And once you feel content with the portals you have checked and everyone you have saved, you can finally travel to the final one, into the resonance where the finale of the game begins. You find yourself outside a portal where the first castoff is having a confrontation you must pull her out of, and after that you both travel through this mysterious portal and it takes you back to that strange location in your mind where you began the entire game. Here you find that ghostly woman again, and it's revealed to you that she's actually the changing god's daughter, Mika. She explains that she was alive during the battle between humanity and the Tabat for Saga's Cliffs, and that during the war at one point she was grazed by a weapon that made her very sick, something her father, the Changing God, became very distraught over. In order to save her, the Changing God transferred her consciousness into a new body, hoping that was all that would be needed. But this procedure didn't stop the slow death, and so he locked her in the resonance chamber and kept her on life support as for years he studied away trying to find a cure, a way to save the only thing that mattered to him in his life, all that he had left, his daughter. And so he studied and used many ancient technologies from past civilizations, like the probability machine we can find in a side quest in game, the heavens rejoinder that we talked about, and he even transported himself into different dimensions and realities to find women that would remind him of his daughter. But none of these solutions worked, and this now mad scientist that was the Changing God had to torture his own daughter for years on end in an attempt to save her, becoming the very monster he tried to protect her from. From the deepest forms of love was birthed the most horrifying rings of hatred. You start to dig through files near the resonance chamber and uncover too that in the final gambit, the Changing God started to transfer his own consciousness to new bodies, so that he could fight for his daughter for all of eternity. But in this venture, he also unwittingly unleashed the tides and the sorrow on the universe, an analogy to releasing hell upon all of creation, damning all of these innocent cast-offs in order to save the ones he loved most. That underspine that the Tabat worship was actually a super intelligence of one of the 9 great and lost civilizations called the Dalad, who had mastered the power of the tides, but with it were being chased by a monster even more ancient than themselves, as old as the universe itself, a monster called the Sorrow. The Changing God awoke the powers of a civilization that existed before the Ninth World itself, and unleashed things he never could have imagined, and it also explains where all of these powers in game come from. And it's also in this moment and looking over some other Mirrorcasters that we realize the Changing God was recently attacked by the Sorrow, and it attacked the chamber his daughter was in and killed her. And in this vision we see the Changing God being knocked unconscious before he even had time to escape to a new body, and his unconscious self started hurtling towards the Ninth World, right into the exact location we awoke at the start of the game. The big villain of the game, the man born of love but driven to hatred, the man that has resulted in the deaths of millions of innocents and rejected his humanity in order to become a monster, is us. It's an awesome twist, one that pays homage to Planescape Torment and its twist as well, but honestly, I just thought this was so obvious. I mean, literally when you start the game, some of the dialogue lines are even jokes about how you might actually be the Changing God himself, not a cast-off, and I just kind of assumed that was the case the whole time. Seemed pretty obvious. I mean, hell, even in the middle of the game when it was revealed that the specter in our head is actually the Changing God, I remember out loud saying to myself, yeah, no, that's me. But regardless, thematically, it's a good twist, and it fits the themes of the game perfectly. Honestly, I wasn't too butthurt about it, even though everyone probably saw it coming a mile away. And it's only after coming to this realization that the Spectre appears in front of you, along with the first cast-off, Mika, and others by your side. The Spectre proclaims it is the Changing God, and you can either fight him outright, or get into a battle of wits where you can convince him he's not in fact the Changing God. Or he may even be able to try and convince you that you aren't the Changing God either. After all, can the nature of a man be changed? Even if you are the same body that housed the Changing God, if you have forgotten your past and through your actions in the game aligned yourself to a new assortment of tides, then are you not a new man entirely? Who then holds the right to call themselves the Changing God? A consciousness of his past that resembles the man he was? Or the actual man he was, but with a new soul? In my first playthrough, I even talked my way out of this entire encounter and convinced the Spectre to give in. And I love when games allow you to talk your way through the final boss like this. It makes the way you build your character all that more impactful, and it's just super satisfying, completely bypassing some of the hardest encounters in game by just talking. And finally, at the very last scene of the game, you meet with an aspect of the Sorrow trapped in your own mind, something it did during the attack on Miela Vest when it saw you in order to make sure it could communicate. And the Sorrow tells you that it will let you decide the fate of all of those you've met, but that it must be in the parameters it has set forth. You see, the Sorrow is not an evil being, it's a being of justice and balance. The ancient powers of which the Changing God has unlocked, of the tides that fuel the universe, have been unleashed, and it's by its very birth and nature that the Sorrow must protect this balance. So your final decision of the game revolves around what you would do. Will you do as the Changing God said and activate the chamber to pull all cast-offs into yourself? Will you pull them into another being entirely, like say the innocent Mika, who deserves a shot at at life that she was never given? Will you sever the ties that hold cast off to the tides and take all of the power away, but also the sorrow hunting them? Will you instead fight back against the sorrow in your mind and take the chance at complete ruination? There's a long list of decisions you can make here, and with each of them you must explain to the sorrow why you made it, what philosophy has driven you to this final moment, and what you have learned along the way to make you act as you do, what tides now flow through your body. And regardless of what you choose, the game ends and you are treated to the credits, and a slideshow showing what ended up happening to everyone in the story. Each ending is unique, with good and bad things alike, and it's here that we see the final breaths of the game. But you see, the thing that makes Tides of Numenera such a special game is that the story doesn't end there. Because as with all great tales or worlds filled with intrigue, the narrative and its themes stay with you long after the credits have rolled. You know, there's a moment in Miela Ves where when talking with Adiris, you ask her why she has been forcing you to speak with all of the cast-offs in this elusive place, and why she thought it was so important you hear all of their stories and opinions before continuing on your journey diving into the Mazoth Mirrorcaster. And she responds with the most important exchange in the entire game. The goal in all of this was to make you question your assumptions, to see things through others' eyes. It may be nothing of importance happens in Zarian's mirror. You might enter, speak with Mazoth, and leave without altering him a bit. But even if so, there will be other mirrors. What if the next one is Melmoth's, or Ramia's, or even mine? Whose assumptions will you take with you into that life? Whose goals will you accomplish and at what cost? You have the power to change the course of a life, of many lives, without their permission or even their knowledge. You will have to weigh their desires against your own, deciding whether the needs of your life are more important than theirs. You will have to know with the utmost certainty and integrity, what does one life matter? And it's this question that sits at the core of the entirety of Torment Tides of Numenera. This one seemingly innocuous question that fundamentally is the driver behind everything you have experienced in-game. You see, Tides is a game of many questions, and it will certainly make you formulate an assortment of your own on the journey you go through it. But really, it's a game about figuring out the importance of life itself. It feels like through each story beat and every side quest or new area you unlock, the main goal is making you start to think about that question. Are we actually the changing God himself, or are we nothing but a mirror of a mind now gone forever? Is it worth saving the cast-offs assuming they did nothing wrong? Or by their very circumstance of birth, are they an evil that must be gotten rid of? And most importantly, what is the value of one life? Throughout the game, we go through countless Mirrorcasters that reveal ancient histories or lives of those we have grown to know. In a way, it could be argued that we as the player ourselves are looking through a Mirrorcaster of our own character's life throughout the story. An interesting analogy for sure. But all of this is in service to really making us wonder what it is that gives one life intrinsic value. Why is it that we strive to save the weak, even those we know nothing about? What is it that gives people that value? And under what circumstances can we sacrifice what some would call innocence for the greater good? Is it a just cause to change the identity of a man or woman in pursuit of some other meaningful motive? When we travel through each of these Mirrorcasters, we quite literally are at every step determining the importance of one life, of one experience. Think back to that levee in Sagas Cliffs that got a bad year from its creator. Without intervention and at no fault of its own, this innocent creature must live its entire life in immense pain that on another note saves a man from his own damnation and a society from a year of ruthless killing. Is the value of this one levee's life, something that we would struggle to even call human, worth the sacrifice or pain that would be wrought in its absence? I think back to cults like the Dendra O'Hur and their cannibalistic tendencies. It's a horrific practice for sure, but maybe that quest for ultimate knowledge and safekeeping is a worthy goal in its own right, no matter the cost. Maybe a life's worth is fully dependent on outside circumstances and what each life can accomplish with its passing. But maybe even one life is worth the cost of everything. Like the Changing God's daughter, Mika. Everything that the Changing God did, all of his research, his disregard for others, and his maniacal reign came from that fundamental belief that his daughter's life was worth any cost. The Changing God saw Mika's life as something worth the ultimate price, any struggle imaginable to save but just one life. But then the question becomes, is that life worth the cost? There's another moment in the Valley of Dead Heroes where you stumble upon a man named Luca Mergoli and his band of followers, who were warriors in the Endless War who abandoned their posts mid-battle and came to the valley to live away their lives in shame. When questioned why, Luca replies, "Yes, we have left our posts, but I do not believe we have deserted. I believe we have become aware. If the battle is endless, then our struggle means nothing. If our struggle means nothing, why should we continue to struggle at all?" Well, I think it's because Tides of Numenera shows us the value in one life is everything. It is worth that struggle. Because in each life within all of us lies an essence of purity, evil, hope, and dreams that can never be extinguished. We travel countless hours through the game visiting temples to lost civilizations or the insides of a Cthulhian monster the likes of which we could never fully understand. But in each of these otherworldly locations and set pieces, every part of them is born from the ashes of those that came before. As much as it seems like the worth of just one life is not that important, sometimes even just your soul can inspire entire future civilizations and birth beauty and sadness alike. To me, Tides of Numenera is a game that shows us no matter how strange a world we live in or how horrifying things can get, there's a humanity in all of us, a nature within every man and woman alike that can be changed. Finally, an answer to that fateful question in the game that inspired Tides in the first place, Planescape Torment. And one of the most moving realizations in a game I've played. If you can't tell, I really enjoyed my time with Torment Tides of Numenera, but it's a hard game to recommend. The sci-fi world and its themes are absolutely amazing in so many ways. It's a story and adventure I'll never forget. But on the same token, often it feels more like a great novel and just a decent video game. I can't imagine how impressive a game in this world with the same themes and philosophy would be with a big AAA budget and better combat and moment-to-moment gameplay or full voice acting. But sometimes the best things in life come from where you least expect them. And in Tide's case, the beauty comes from exploring and uncovering its many pitfalls in order to see the greatness that lies at its center. This game now lies amongst my pantheon of experiences that have left me thinking the most, right up there with the Mass Effects, the Planescape Torments, and the Cyberpunk 2077s. For me too though, I think a lot of it comes down to my personal preference. After beating this game and writing all of my notes on it, I went back and read some other people's reviews to see what they thought too, and a lot of people don't like this game too much. They think the gameplay is bad, but also that the story is rushed and the twists and characters are too mundane. In a lot of ways, I would agree, but the thing that makes Tides of Numenera stand out amongst its peers is the world. You know, I've always been more interested in the worlds in games rather than just the stories they tell. Don't get me wrong, Tides tells some really amazing stories and has moments that I would say rival some of the best in any other games I can think of. And sure, the main story has some plot holes here and there, and yes, it could have been structured in a better way potentially. But for me, none of that actually matters all that much, because the world itself is just so easy to get lost in. It's the same reason I love Mass Effect 1 and I don't like the second Mass Effect all that much, while for most people it's the exact opposite. I just find interesting worlds and ideas so much more fascinating than memorable stories and characters. Don't get me wrong, a great cast of characters and a story that is engaging the whole way through is cool, but for me, nothing tops that feeling of just walking around in a world and feeling swept up by its very nature itself, of wanting to know every little thing about its past and the questions it asks, about the themes it will make you approach. For me, an amazing story in a boring world is a lost opportunity. But a bad story in an amazing world is the fuel for a lifetime of imagination. And by my calculations, Tides of Numenera has both. It's certainly not a game for everyone. In fact, it's really not a game for many people at all. But at its core, Tides is an experience unlike any other, and I'm so happy I gave it the time it deserved and the analysis it begged for, regardless of whether or not it will become a popular franchise really ever. Most people would say the best games in this genre are Planescape Torment and Disco Elysium, but if I'm being honest, The world of Planescape Torment just never dragged me in like Tides, but I am a sci-fi nut and not so much a D&D one. And Disco Elysium, well, for all the great writing and choice and consequence in that game, I never over my 20 hours playing it was able to bring myself to actually enjoy it, because the world it was housed in was so uninspired and uninteresting to me. Because after all, lots of games ask interesting questions or tackle controversial themes, but not so many bring me fully into a world that I can't help but get lost in. Tides is a game that you probably should never play, but without a shadow of a doubt, it's a game that you need to know about. And I'm glad for those of you who made it this far into this video, you finally do. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching and supporting what I do here. I put a ton of effort and work into all of the videos I put out, and I love seeing how much you guys enjoy them and the feedback every time. Let me know down below if you guys have played Tides of Numenera, and if so, what you thought, or if not, how you felt about my analysis and the themes in this underrated classic. Also, I do have a channel membership program linked down below for anyone that wants to support what I do here even more and help me afford paying for things like artists and others to facilitate growing the channel here. And also, check out my GOG affiliate link in the description as well if you want to give me a cut of all the games you buy off GOG, like say Tides of Numenera. And finally, also let me know down below what other games you guys would like to see me do a deep dive on. I love doing videos like this, analyzing a game and its mechanics, as well as the philosophy and meaning behind it all. So I'd love to see what you guys want to see next. And as always, I hope you have a fantastic day, and until next time.